Well, welcome everybody. This is Tearsheet Live. We've been doing more of these lately. They feel much more alive than our recorded podcast. I'm joined by three very special guests who I'll get to in a second. But this is Card Launch 101, your ultimate guide to building and launching a successful card. If you've been paying attention and follow Tearsheet, we've been running a series on launching a card all throughout last year. Actually, a couple of these guys that were part of that series, and so we'll get a chance to hear about them. But launching a card is essential and is core to a lot of offerings that fintechs have. And what we wanted to do from here was, given all the experience we've had at Tearsheet, reporting on card launches, reporting on new products and partnerships, we wanted to kind of unpack it all so that we really created a guide, a 101 guide, and I'll put a link up for it in a bit, to take the learnings out there, the best practices that a lot of companies out there, companies like FNBO, Galileo, and DailyPay, came to through hard-earned experience with launching cards. What went wrong, what went right. And I really believe we can extract some of those learnings so that if you're launching your next card, whether you're an early stage company or more mature, you've got a lot to learn on. You're basically a midget on the shoulders of giants. And we wanted to help make that clear to everybody. So we're thrilled to announce this LinkedIn Live event where we're going to delve into the strategies and insights and best practices for launching and growing successful card products. Joining me, we've got three industry experts. We've got Scott Johnson, Vice President of Revenue at Galileo, Mark Butterfield, SVP of Innovation and Disruption, and we'll talk about why he has the word disruption in his title at FNBO, and Jack Rubin, SVP of Consumer Financial Solutions at DailyPay. And here's what to expect today. We're going to understand what goes into a card launch, like the components of strategy and planning and market research and product development. Identifying your audience. This is a very important one. Learn how to identify and understand your target audience through market research, data analysis, and also expectating on what's worked and what hasn't worked out in the market. Lastly, you're talking about creating your card, explore the process of designing and developing card products, from features and branding to user experiences and regulatory compliance. And then you have everything that happens after there, picking a vendor, marketing and promotion, and monetizing and optimizing the program. So that's what we plan to hit on today. And I'm glad you guys are joining us. So let's get to our first question. You guys have seen the bios in the show notes. We can include some more of those after. Let's start with our first question to Mark. As responsible for innovation and disruption, how do you define innovation in the context of banking, and what role does it play in driving business growth and competitive advantage?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach, and great to see Scott again, and nice to meet Jack. So how we think about innovation at FNBO is really kind of twofold, and it really leverages a lot of the Clay Christensen 3 Horizons of Innovation model. Our small team helps enable the entire bank think about trends, emerging technologies, consumer preferences, and if they're what we consider Horizon 1 or 2, like more near term within the next few years, we help the bank provide and enable the tools and processes necessary to think about those things. Like an example would be before we actually execute on it, figure out if customers actually want it, which seems like a novel concept, but a lot of organizations don't answer that first question of desirability first. But our team then focuses on, which you and I have talked about before around disruption, is Horizon 3 innovation, which is things that really don't have a consumer or a market yet, but might be there. And it can be existential, like crypto or anything like that. But it really is about allowing that team to explore general trends, give them freedom and oxygen to go explore that space. And it might not have anything to do with banking, but give them a discipline around, okay, you have weeks to do that. You have a very small budget to do that. But then bring it back and share with the enterprise and answer, so what? Like, why should FNBO care? And 99 times out of 100, the answer is don't really need to care. There isn't anything meaningful here, but it allows that team to go explore those trends. And that's how we think about it. That's kind of a two-pronged approach, and being disciplined around that approach is important.
So as I had a weird question I was thinking of as we were prepping for this call, is your role, is it Taylor Swift Eras Tour, or is it some other type of, is there a metaphor that you can bring from like sort of popular culture that you can bring to the type of work that you do?
So I would actually say it's Taylor Swift tortured poets is what it is. Just to use a more common reference that I think my daughters would appreciate. But it really is a lonely role. That's what we tell the team. You're out there sometimes shouting from the rooftops about things that are going to happen in 5 years. And they typically happen a lot longer out than you think, as everybody knows. But yeah, it's trying to avoid a flavor of the month shiny button thing and getting too bogged down with committing too much time and resources. So it's a balance of allowing people to go explore, but be disciplined in how you do it. And it's a weird balance because finding people that want to just go do things don't want structure. So it's trying to balance that of like, we're still a bank, we're still a highly regulated industry, allow them to go explore, but do it in a very quick manner and make quick decisions. And so I don't know, I guess I would say there's a variety there in terms of an Eras tour. But yeah, I think it's more of an approach around, there's a lot of different things to look at, but how can you stay focused? But then when we enable it for the actual enterprise, it's being a lot more disciplined and focused around what problem are they trying to solve? Do customers want it? Those types of things, but it's applying the same process.
Got it. Thank you for that. And thanks for handling that impromptu question as well. I did listen to every song on that album. Jack, kicking it over to you. Can you provide insights into your ideation process behind what makes for a successful card program? And I guess as a corollary, like, how do you identify the need for such a product and translate it into what type of offering you're going to make?
Yeah, it's a great question, Zach. Thanks, and also thanks as well for having us all in this conversation today. I think we'll learn and exchange lots of great ideas together. Our approach to the ideation process and how we look at the needs of the consumers, the end users that we serve, it starts with the very narrow problem that we're trying to solve for them, right? You figure out who it is that you're serving and what are their needs and what is the problem that you're solving for them. And in the case of Daily Pay, we're providing people access to their earned wages as they earn them. And the problem that solves for them is helping them make their ends meet. Because we all know that your bills don't care about when your paycheck is coming, right? Your electric bill
they never come at a convenient time.
Your electric bill,
never care.
Yeah, your electric bill doesn't care that your paycheck is coming tomorrow because the due date is today. And so what we endeavor to do is to help people get access to their earned wages as they earn them, to help make their ends meet and to make their cash flow match. And so if you start with that problem that you're solving and you say, well, how do we extend solving that problem further? Then you start looking and saying, well, if we have a better insight, not only to what you're earning, but what you're spending, we can then help you make those ends meet by predicting when you're going to have another need for an outflow of cash, a bill that's due, and help you make sure that the money is there in your account in order to pay that. And so that becomes the genesis of why a card offering would make sense for us to offer to our end users. But it starts with that deep empathy of understanding, walking in their shoes, knowing what the problems are to be solved in their lives, and staying obsessed with, focused on, and in love with solving their problems more than on selling them our solutions. And that's our approach to innovating in that way.
And it sounds to me like that requires just a really clear view of what your mission is, right? Like, and sticking to it, right? Being consistent through your product offerings.
It does. You know, in the innovation space, we talk a lot about pivoting, and agility is incredibly important. As long as you've got a North Star and a center line that you can return to. And in our case, that's our mission. It's the people we serve. It's creating the future financial system and providing access to financial products and services to those who are underserved in that regard. And as we think about innovating on that approach, I'm inspired by something Mark said a couple of minutes ago. It's interesting, when you're doing work at scale, there's this traditional trade-off between speed, quality, and resources, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're innovating, interestingly, it's the inverse.
Yep.
Right? You shorten the time, you shorten the resources, you increase the quality.
Yep.
Because what you're trying to get at is at addressing that problem for the user in a way that they'll actually use it. If you weigh down the solution with too many other features that may not be important to them right now, they may not use it at all, right? So more actually might not actually be good for them. Sometimes less is more in that case when it comes to innovation. And that all starts with, as you said, having deep empathy for the people who we serve, walking in their shoes, and keeping them as our focus and our mission for our innovation.
Thanks for that. And Scott, I want to start off with you now. Given the fact that you've worked with a lot of the, some of the top card programs in the industry, can you give us a little perspective on how the landscape of payments and their products have evolved over the years, and like kind of what trends you're seeing through that?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I'm also kind of thinking back to Mark's comment on the Era Store and the question. Our parent company is SoFi, and what's interesting is with the Era Store, we had the Super Bowl at SoFi Stadium, then we had the Era Store, and I'll give you one guess which was a lot more requested for tickets. It was the Era Store. Like, it wasn't even close. It's fascinating to see how much. And again, my 11-year-old daughter, I said, I'll try and work something Swifty into this discussion today. But really, as you go back and look at kind of the payment ecosystem, I think what's been so interesting is what's happened over kind of the last 10, 11, 12 years. So if you go back, look historically, these devices here, they have drastically changed the way that I think and we think about the payment landscape. Really, this has enabled the electronification of payments, right? And so as we think about what this technology has done, it has allowed for all sorts of things. Our platform is an API-driven platform, so we're enabling great programs to use the mobile device, and thinking of using that type of technology to enable these apps that we live with day to day. And we've seen that time and time again of that's where this started. What's been interesting then is to see how this has kind of evolved, lately. And I think of just over the last couple of years, one of the trends that we've seen in payments, and probably the only good thing that came out of COVID, was the adoption of contactless payments. So if you go back just 3-4 years ago, you think of how infrequently in this country we did tap and pay type of transactions, whether it's push provisioning a card to a wallet or just with a physical credential. COVID happens, and all of a sudden you can see this broad adoption. Now compare that to where the EU and other parts of the world were. They were drastically ahead of us in the EU than we were here in the US and in North America. So I think that's kind of one of the more recent trends. But I think the other thing that's really, really interesting is you look kind of in future trends and where I think payments are going to go. I think there's a couple of things. I think we'll talk more about AI and machine learning. I think that there's a lot of applications.
Can't have a conversation without AI and
machine learning. Right? Like you can't. It's like either you have to say
working that in
AI within the first 30 seconds of any conversation right now. But yeah, you definitely, you look at this and you say, I think that there's a lot of applications for that. But I also look at, some of these programs that you look at kind of some of the super apps that are out there, especially more internationally. Like you look in Asia, China, you've got WeChat Pay, you've got Alipay, and some of those things that are, embedded into, kind of these super apps where you've got news and weather, those basic things. But then you've got banking and shopping and all sorts of things in one app. It'd be interesting to see if there's more adoption of super apps in the future here, or if we continue to just have more of these kind of lines blend in the payment space where you've got embedded finance types of programs being embedded into, kind of disparate apps like we have today. So I think it'll be really interesting to see where all this plays out.
Great. Thanks for that, Scott. I want to stick with you. By the way, comment came in from the crowd. So innovation without emission is futile. Thanks, John Thomas Lang. Sticking with you, Scott. So again, with this purview, this perspective of having worked across lots of different programs, can you share some insights into like key factors that you think contribute to a successful program?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And I think we kind of look at it in kind of it's this life cycle of card programs, kind of starting top of funnel and moving down through. So you kind of start first on the customer acquisition, kind of strategy or process. We've got a great suite of APIs that allows our partners to build great programs. Jack and the Daily Pay team are very familiar with these types of things. But really looking at building a frictionless process, kind of starting. It's interesting to see, there's multiple websites out there that track how quickly can someone get a product by signing up for it. How many clicks do they need to make? How long does it take in order to get, whether it's an earned wage access program, an expense management program, a direct to consumer program, debit or credit. So we really start thinking kind of at that area, how easily is it for someone to get a product? Now, the other thing that's interesting is you start kind of at the top of the funnel is looking at customer acquisition cost. We see huge variation across our platform on customer acquisition costs. It depends if it's a debit or credit, if it's a consumer or commercial type of program, but also, a lot of people, I think Mark touched a little bit about this on the innovation side. If you're looking at launching something that's brand new and you don't really have a customer base per se to market to, that customer acquisition cost is unbelievably expensive. So kind of one of the things we look at, and we've seen where our programs are successful, where they're really dialed in kind of on that first stage on their customer acquisition cost. You then look at kind of going down into the funnel. Okay, so now you've acquired a customer. Well, how do you get them to activate? Well, one of the things that we talk about all the time again is push provisioning, a card directly to a wallet. So now you can create an account on our platform, and within a couple of seconds, you can push, a card directly to a wallet. And now someone can go out and start using that card in the world. And so you see how quickly they can get, access to a card credential in a wallet. The other thing we see is some of our partners specialize in getting, physical plastic into someone's hands. We work with 12 or 13 different embossed facilities. So we have some partners who'll say, I only want to work with an East Coast fulfillment facility because I've got a lot of East Coast cardholders and I want to be able to get a card in their hand quicker. So you kind of look at those types of things, anything that you can get to get card in hand and to get someone to start activating. Once you've activated, now you start looking at how do you make someone actually use this card? Again, whether it's credit, debit, consumer, or commercial, it's all about usage, right? You've spent all this time and money and effort in getting them there. And I'll talk about just one or two specific kind of things that we see as best practices. And you think of how we all live our lives. Every one of us has to go to the gas station and fill up our tank. Everyone, unless you have a hybrid, but everyone's got to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, right? Everyone's got to do these things. Well, what card credential are you doing for that? If you're targeting on a consumer program, if it's a small business expense management, where are you buying, your key expenses? What card credential you're using? Anything that you can do to incent that to be, some type of reward or loyalty play for those key purchases, very quickly that card starts creeping up to be a top of wallet type of program. So those are kind of some of the key things that we see in building out a successful card program.
Appreciate that, Scott. Mark, back to you. Can you share some examples of some of the innovative card products or services that FNBO has launched or been involved in developing with some partners, and what you see as some of the key challenges and maybe some of the successes? Can you point to what it was that enabled that to be successful with those initiatives?
Yeah, one thing, and it'll all revolve around a point Scott made that I thought was really insightful. It's helpful to go back and understand, and it seems so simple, but it's important to break down, like why does a card work for a customer? And it enables a really smooth transaction, right, Scott? That's what you're saying. Like, so that initial way to embed it into the experience of the customer journey is so key. And like Scott said at Galileo, with the APIs they built to enable that, to allow for that embedded experience, is important. We also do that at FNBO in our partnerships group. And so that's really the key with our partners, is enabling a really smooth transaction, both to acquire the card and then to use it in that workflow. And so some of our successful partnerships involve digitally provisioning that, but also physically provisioning that. So our recent partnership with Greenlight, we digitally provisioned the card and allowed them to use it right away. So you applied for the card, you digitally provisioned, and that was, in terms of that acquisition piece, it was a super smooth way and easy way to do it. We also have a partnership with MGM Resorts, and we do both. We can digitally provision, but we also can physically give them a card when they apply on campus there at any of their resorts, which is pretty exciting. It sounds scary, and there's a lot that goes into that on the operational, on the back end of, hey, you're giving customers cards in Vegas, but you want them to use it, and as long as we're accountable for making that a safe and sound way to do it, which we are, it enables a really great customer experience. And then our recent launch, which is still in a soft launch with Universal Studios, we're going to enable that same experience in their theme parks. You apply for the card, you can have it digitally provisioned, but you can also have a physical card. You can get % off at everything. And so for that first part of the funnel that Scott says, you have to get really, really good at that to be able to enable that. And as Scott also knows, there's a lot that goes into the back end of that to do it well. But I would say those are the most successful ones, is when you can create a really smooth transaction and an embedded transaction, an embedded experience at the point of sale.
Yeah, those theme park ones are really fascinating when you start to think about some of the permutations and benefits that you get from having a card, whether it's virtual or physical. Jack, I want to ask you a similar question. Obviously, managing a card program involves a lot of intricacies, from designing features to the regulatory stuff we haven't even touched on yet. But what are some key considerations that you see in creating and managing a card program, and how do you navigate those effectively? What advice would you give to the people out there?
Yeah, a really great question, and one we could probably talk about for an hour. So just the time, 3 thoughts on that. First, I think, as you mentioned, navigating the complexities of a complex regulatory environment, but also the many, many steps that it takes as Scott laid out in the funnel, from not only the user's experience in enrolling in, adopting, using a card, but also all of the steps in between when they actually want to load money onto the card or increase the credit limit, if it were, all the way through making a payment at the point of sale to where the money moves throughout the system. There are so many steps, so many layers, that the first thing I'd say is working with partners who have been there and done that, who can get you up the learning curve faster, is incredibly important. There are a lot of things in user experience that organizations like ours can learn our way through that may be very unique to the population we serve or the setting, the go-to-market setting in which we work. But the nuances, the intricacies, the layers, the complexity of money movement and payment systems and cards and functionality, not to even mention the compliance and regulatory aspect of it, means that you need to start not at the bottom of the learning curve. You need to start further up, or with those that can help move you up the learning curve a lot faster. I think the second thing that we keep in mind in just managing that complexity of the card program is maintaining the focus that we talked about a few minutes ago. There's so many things one can do with a card, so many features, so many benefits, and depending upon what the end user that you're looking to serve, their need state, their use cases for this particular card within their wallet, within their suite of financial products they have, that focus, that laser focus on what problems you're solving for them, which usage occasions, is going to help you narrow the focus on the features, the functionality that you need, because there are a range of there's a reason there's a range of options in this industry. And then the third thought that I have is focusing on a continual innovation mindset in that regard. And so we've talked in different ways about that so far in this conversation. But one of the really important things to do when you've got an ongoing relationship with an end user, no matter what product category you're in, but particularly here, I would think about a card program the way that you might think about like a subscription model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have an ongoing relationship that you want to maintain. So you want to think about not only establishing that relationship and maintaining it, how does one maintain a relationship in a subscription program? If we take ourselves out of this category for a second, just think about any streaming service that you subscribe to, right? Why do you maintain your relationship? Because they are constantly enhancing that offering with more value, with more content in their catalog, and increasingly more and more tailored to your needs, or at least it feels that way to you, because those are the items that are surfaced to you both in product and marketing growth loops, if you will. That's technical terminology, but in the ways that things are surfaced to you, either in the product experience or in the marketing communications. And so that third part is really focusing on continually bringing new news and enhancing the value of that relationship to the user in ways that are increasingly more impactful for them.
Yep. So that's really interesting. I want to extend that, what you were saying there, Jack. Like, so there's the product, and then how the product sits within a company's sort of ecosystem of the value that it provides to its end users. And as Mark's talking about, theme park cards, that have a role. There's it's not just a spending card. There's a experience, and a functionality that's embedded into the card. How do you think about how a card program plays a role in a company's like total product offering, and how do you help it align with a broader mission and vision of a company? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so those are a couple of great questions.
Standing on one leg, yeah.
Yeah, it's a couple of great questions. Let me start with the second part, the last part of it, though, because I think that's incredibly important, as we've talked about a couple of times in this conversation, is to remain mission aligned. There are a lot of ways to introduce new products and offerings, including new ways to introduce cards. And the remaining mission, and there's a lot of ways to grow revenue too, by the way. Remaining mission aligned helps you grow revenue that you're glad that you have, and not revenue that you have to work your way out of, right? And so that's why it's important to remain mission aligned as you do this. If you think about the specific role of the card in the portfolio, it can vary from company to company, but in the environment that I'm more familiar with, we think about it as deepening and extending the impact that we have in people's lives, and then extending the relationship with them. So if you think about those two roles, you start with deepening the impact you have in their lives, right? 6 in 10 Americans American households are living paycheck to paycheck. 6 in 10, right? Depending on which study you look at, 1 in 5 or even 1 in 4 have zero money saved for an emergency. And the percentage that don't even have $400, which is an entry threshold for an emergency, is double that. right? I mean, these are real problems. 93% of lower income households have a credit score that is below prime. That means they're near prime or subprime. All of these factors make it very, very challenging and very difficult to make forward progress financially. And so if you think about the role that a card can play in a portfolio, and as we think of the role it plays in our portfolio, is how do we make progress against those durable challenges that those households have that we're serving? And then how do we continually add value to that offering as they progress on their financial journey, knowing that any step on their financial journey, not only they, but we all are we're one car repair, one busted pipe on our house, one unplanned trip to the emergency room away from our ends not meeting in a given month.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly we're in a position where we're not only got more bills to pay than we have money coming in, but now we're accruing interest, late payment penalty fees, and what have you that stack on top of one another. And so getting that's the connection there between the mission and the role in the portfolio, is to stay focused on that mission, the problem that we're solving, be very, very clear the role of the card in our portfolio. In our case is what is deepening that impact in the lives of the people we serve, extending the length of the relationship, and continually innovating in the space that adds value that way.
Mark, this is for you. I said we'd come back to that, term disruption in your job title. So how does FNBO and you particularly approach the process of identifying and responding to disruptive trends in the banking industry? And are there any specific strategies or frameworks that you employ to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, just to drill down on, I mentioned innovation process, and it's evolved for us over the years since we've had this dedicated team for the last 5.5 years. But it's really important to be clear on what your KPIs are at each stage in the process, and so key performance indicators. Trying not to use too much jargon, but it really is. We call them learning KPIs. It's how many things did you go explore. It's not financial KPIs at that early stage. And to Jack's point, it's about exploring. It's about moving quickly. It's about what did you learn? What are your learning objectives? So a main framework for us is around what are those learning objectives? And in that early stage, it's measured in weeks, not months. And so it's super important that you go learn those things and then share them with the broader team so they can see what you learned and what you experienced. And so it really is from that, you might form a concept, a business concept or an initiative or an idea. And we say that a lot on our team. The idea is the easiest part in the process. The hardest part is everything else before and after it. And so really it is assessing, what is the market? Does this matter? And then I call it putting the FNBO wrapper on it. Like, would we even do it? Because like what Jack is doing at Daily Pay, we looked at earned wage access, and the customer desirability on that, Jack, was off the charts. So it was a clear need, and it was like, so are we going to do that in the next few years? And the answer is we can enable things like that, but let's shelve it for now. That isn't a specific thing that we're going to do. And that's an example of something that tested really well. But when you go to the next stage and be like, okay, should FNBO build a business around this? All the other things we have going on, that's the Tortured Poet Society that I was mentioning with Taylor Swift. It's like, okay, you can't do everything, so you got to be disciplined about it, even though that is something that's obviously a need that customers want. We're going to show that because there are other folks like Daily Pay better placed to do that at this point. And so you got to be okay with saying no to things, even if they show well. And I think that's the real secret to innovation, is being clear on the mission, like LinkedIn's person already said, and being disciplined on saying no to things.
Right. I've heard a lot of CEOs say like that's their magic power, is being able to say no and knowing what to say no to,
Right.
which is a real skill. Scott, we've talked about product, we talked about strategy, we talked about ideation and where these card products fit into sort of company ecosystems. I want to talk a little bit about growth now, and how do you guys approach the process of scaling card programs for clients that need that? And are there any specific strategies or tactics that you find particularly effective?
Yeah, and I want to touch on a little bit what both Jack and Mark were talking about with this kind of one of the key things about scaling. And I'll talk here in a second about like platform scaling and why that's so critical, but also just keeping this kind of relentless view of the customer and this focus in mind. I mean, I love, again, the earned wage access space. Jack talked about how important that space is. One of the things that's so critical in scaling is making sure that you have a product that there is really, really a need for. And I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but at the end of the day, I mean, it is very, very interesting to see how important there are these programs are out there, like an earned wage access program. We've got some other ones, like buy now, pay later, that have very, very specific use cases. I think that that's one of the key things to look at as you're getting into scaling this card program is really having this idea around innovation and some things that Mark and Jack have talked about. I also want to talk then looking at this as we think about kind of some of the things that we suggest and look at. There's been a lot of emphasis lately, on programs and a lot of, regulatory focus, again, as you think about the Federal Reserve and novel concepts and those types of things. So I would make sure, again, one of the first things that we look at as well as a payment infrastructure company is to say, is this something that, you can scale from a regulatory perspective as well? And then we look at ourselves and in the platform and our partners. We need to make sure that all of the horsepower is there to be able to scale programs, right? The nuts and bolts. I mean, we're an API first, cloud native AWS hosted platform. So we've got kind of all the bells and whistles to do as many transactions per second as needed. But then also looking at all the other ancillary things that are needed to be successful in scaling these programs. Some are very specific to, timeframes for processing ACH transactions or different types of API transactions. So you've got to make sure that, again, from a horsepower or platform perspective, that you've got all of that in place. But then looking at as you get to scale, right? Like one of the things that can just drive people crazy and really bog them down in this process are manual processes, right? So that's one of the things that we look at is saying, even on these edge cases, where can we use, types of machine learning and AI potentially to solve some of these problems? One of the things that we really focus on is a product that we've built that's an AI driven chatbot called Connected. That's really an empathy engine. So we found that it does an amazing job in decreasing the level of frustration with customers, decreasing the number of customer service calls and those types of things to really help in some of these manual processes that, as we all know, they just don't scale. And those, are kind of some of the key areas that we recommend that people implement on their program. And then lastly, the other thing that I would say that we spend a lot of time on is helping our partners understand the data and the analytics of a program. You can spend an unbelievable amount of time kind of focusing on a very kind of small problem for a small percentage of people. But as you look at the data and what's available, again, we have a great analytics tool that allows for a lot of segmentation analysis and attrition analysis and everything associated with different parts of a card program. Those are the areas that you can really kind of dial in the innovation or make changes so that you're able to then just to continue to scale. Because again, within a card portfolio, there's lots of different usage. And some people have made this, like we're talking about earlier, top of wallet. Others might use this, use a card program occasionally or for some very specific purpose. So how do you look at data and using our analytics tool to make that a successful card program really scale? It's going to all be about the data as you start to get more and more cardholders.
Yep.
Thanks for that, Scott. Jack, to you, we're talking about marketing here and scaling. So obviously marketing plays a big role in promoting financial solutions like your own card program. Can you share any key insights that you have from marketing that you've done to successfully promote a card to both employers and employees? What messaging tactics, what channels have you used?
Yeah, Zach, it's a great question. If it's okay, I'll take a slight step back for that as we work our way into the question and say that
Sure.
I've had the privilege of working in go-to-market marketing functions and across a variety of industries, right? From packaged goods to retail to technology and the better part of the last decade in financial products and services. And what I've seen remain consistent in that time are a few things. And then I'm going to get into some more specific tactics and strategies. The first is, as we've talked about, understanding and knowing the population you're serving intimately, their need states, their use cases, and what have you. There's a lot written on that and a lot of focus on that. And more often than not, at least nowadays, most marketers understand, most organizations do put a sufficient focus there. The second is getting super clear on the value propositions that you're offering. So what is going to create value in their lives that's worthy of the exchange of either time or money, right? Because they're both valuable to people in order to use that product or service, especially in the case of a card, right? It's adopting either your first or another financial product, right? So it's either, you either got to get over the hurdle, this is my first one, and the fear, uncertainty, doubt associated with that, or you've got to get over the hurdle of what does this replace in my other spending habits, if you will, or the other parts of my wallet. Typically, that connection between the market and the product, and finding the product market fit and focusing the right value proposition to the right audience, again, is a place where there's been a lot of emphasis in the last few years in the craft and in the industry. Not to say that it should be overlooked, but it's a place where I see a lot of progress. The third place is interesting. It's one that Scott talked about a lot, that I feel like we're just maturing as an industry and a craft in this. And as you think about reaching those end users, when and where they are most receptive, right, to this solution, to the problem that they're looking to solve, right, this thing that'll add value in their lives. And in a lot of cases, the better the value proposition, the more unique it sounds, the more the higher the hurdle is of believability. So if this thing is so great, why haven't I heard of it before? Why hasn't somebody already done it? Right? There's a higher believability, the more powerful it sounds. It's an interesting kind of dichotomy there. And so in that last part, the place to focus, getting more pointedly toward the question you asked about tactics, that's the part where we think about when and where to reach people. And that's the place that I think gets us tripped up sometimes, or when we get it right is really, really powerful. And the simple measure there, the really simple measure to focus on there is lifetime value to cost of acquisition ratio, or called LTV to CAC. And Scott talked about this, but that's the place that creates the most headwinds in your financial wherewithal, like your business economics and your wherewithal and your ability to reach that audience with that great solution. If you're not getting sufficient enough, if you're not generating sufficient enough lifetime value for the enterprise, you can't fund more marketing channels. And if the cost of acquisition is too high, that'll very quickly eat up the cash, the operating expense you have available to you to do innovative marketing. And so that sounds very much like an accounting perspective on marketing rather than a marketing perspective on marketing. I have to tell you, working across industries, you get enough data and you see it enough times again. And it's actually particularly the case in financial services and a lot of companies that offer cards. What's creating a lot of headwind for them is that cost of acquisition, or more specifically, the ratio of lifetime value to cost of acquisition. So what tactics work well? Finding a cost of acquisition, finding channels where there is lower friction and more focused effort, right? You have a higher cost of acquisition in more cluttered environments. You have a higher cost of acquisition in environments where you are competing on the open market for eyeballs and for clicks in very popular categories, right? And you have lower cost of acquisition where you are more focused and more narrow. And from a lifetime value standpoint, you have a much stronger lifetime value depending on the horizon you're measuring. I actually think in a fast-moving space like this, I don't know if I'd look beyond 2 years in calculating the LTV. Standard is 3 to 5, but I don't know if I look beyond that. You see a much stronger LTV when you think about, as we talked about, when you think about your card program almost like a subscription program, and you think about the full life cycle of marketing that Scott described. You think about not only acquisition, but you think about adoption, you think about usage, you think about new use occasions, you think about new value enhancements that take your value prop further. And in the case of Daily Pay, where we're trying to help people, right, gain access to their earned wages as they earn them so that they can make their ends meet and make their money last from one paycheck to the next in that environment, what can we do that adds value that makes the money go further? Well, what if they can start to get cashback rewards is one of the ideas that was mentioned here on their everyday purchases like food and fuel, right? Right. That is an example of an innovation space that we can then market through full life cycle marketing that introduces new reasons to use the product, that reminds people the value of the product that they're using, and give them reasons to retain or maintain having that card top of wallet and used for more occasions in the future. And that helps ultimately, that LTV to CAC ratio then helps create the flywheel and fuel the positive momentum in your marketing cycle.
Hey, so Jack, before we leave,
please,
Jack, something really interesting there that I just want to touch on as well about meeting, customers where they're at. And, I think, Mark and I and Galileo and FNBO have a similar customer, a joint customer in Greenlight. They've done an amazing job in meeting customers where they are with this parent teen program. what's been fantastic to see, and again, touching back on what Jack's talking about the CAC versus, lifetime value or long-term value, it's amazing to see, to no surprise, how quickly some of those programs can go viral if you've really got something nailed. And that's a phenomenal program because, I look at that and you see, how quickly, again, my teenagers that love that product, look at this and say, yeah, they're out talking to their friends or sharing that on social media. Those are the programs that when you've really got that meeting with someone where they're at, it's amazing to see how quickly those programs can grow, because you've got something you're absolutely meeting, the customer need, and then they can just go, viral.
Yeah. I was going to add to what you were saying around the economics have to work, LTV and CAC, and a nuance of a card partnership program that I wanted to mention that Jackie made me think about is the importance of being able to adapt the value prop and iterate and change it. In our experience at FNBO with partnerships, it's rare that you get that value prop right out of the gate.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah. It's so important that you go back to that beginning piece of, are your goals aligned with your partner? If you're trying to drive loyalty and engagement, look at the data, and it's easy to say we got to spend less money on marketing or whatever, but you've got to go back to the product and the value prop first and look at the data and be like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And that's what we find our most successful programs happened on probably version 3 or 4 of that value prop.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's right.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you got to think about iteration as a feature, not a bug.
Right. Yes.
Right. Iterating because you're wrong. You're iterating because that's how you get it right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you have to keep the economics in sight as you're figuring it out, so you still have some room to maneuver, right?
Exactly.
Scott, I want to go back to you. You mentioned, this issue between physical and virtual cards. I know it's something that we're seeing more and more throughout the industry. Can you talk a little bit about the role of physical cards, the way you see it in the future, and do you see any innovations coming down the pike?
Yeah, great question. So I think, we are a big believer in digital or virtual first type of programs, right? To get, again, going back to like that instant gratification, being able to push, a card credential directly to a wallet. I still, though, believe, and maybe I'm a little old school, I still believe that there's a need for, physical cards in the marketplace. I think that there's some programs that you'll see that spend a lot of money on having that, kind of touch and feel experience. So I think what we are a big believer in is kind of the hybrid approach for being able to do that, especially right now, and being able to say, listen, I've got a digital first product, so I can get, cards directly into a wallet. I can start using it, but also have that credential. Now, where this goes over time, I don't know. Again, for us, we just think of a physical card as just an access into a data element on our system that has value, right? An account structure that has value. So whether, again, it's card not present transactions, digital transactions, physical transactions, but I do think, there is still a lot of value today in having the right type of card program. And we see, again, lots of partners who spend, time and working with, some people really like, they're putting the image of them and their kids out fishing on a card. That's great. If you want to have that type of experience versus, kind of some of the higher end metal cards that are out there. So I think that there still is a lot of value on that. But again, making sure that as you look at that these are, again, kind of a contactless first or a digital first approach to the physical and virtual cards.
I'm still waiting for the Swifty card. Mark, how do you guys see it?
Yeah. A lot of thoughts on that going through, but I agree with Scott. It is still a hybrid approach. And then the type of form factor of the physical card goes back to aligning it with the needs of the partner and making sure that, are you trying to exude, like with Apple Card, that experience, or do you want to have a really reinforcement image on it? Like Universal, I think one of our cards is like the Minions, so it's like, what do you want to have on there? For our MGM, one of our most popular designs is the actual, I'll call it the skyline of all the MGM resorts. Mm-hmm. And it's because every time you bring that card out to spend, you're reminded of, hey, I'm earning loyalty to go back to a resort. And so that's very experiential and real. You want to reinforce that digitally too, to Scott's point, and here at FNBO, we do that. But there still is, our most successful programs have that hybrid approach. Give them the physical card right away if you can, and give them the digital card right away if you can. And that is gets the highest activation, to Scott's second point in that funnel, is getting both of them into them as soon as possible to that customer and reinforcing that engagement and loyalty.
Great. Thank you for that. Scott, back to you. While we're on the topic here of engagement and activation, I want to ask you about that. So with, obviously different clients have different account activation rates, and even programs with the same client would have different rates. What benchmarks do you recommend that your clients use to measure and enhance both activation and engagement?
Yeah, you're spot on, Zach. There's a ton of variation: consumer, commercial, small business, credit, debit. So we do see a lot of different variations about, kind of some of these metrics, but there's probably, kind of 4 or 5 key metrics that we really recommend. And it's fun for us sitting, we like to think of ourselves as the AWS of fintech because we run a lot of different types of programs. So we have a lot of different data points as you look at this. But, first I look kind of just at activation rates. And those can vary widely, but we see some programs, depending on the use case, some active, all of them are active. But if you have programs that are, that are not, activating right at the time of account creation, we see some programs that get in the high, 60s and 70% for activation rates. So that's kind of that first step in the funnel. But then once, if somebody's activated their card, well, again, if it's a debit product, the next metric that you've got to look at is funding. So on the consumer side, one of the things that we look at is on a debit program, what is the time to fund, right? How quickly are they funding? And not only that, how quickly are they funding with a direct deposit on a consumer program? Maybe on a small business program, it's how quickly are they accessing and doing their first transaction to access a line of credit. Those types of things are kind of key metrics. So we definitely look at those. And, on a consumer debit program, if you're getting 20 to 25, 30%, funding on direct deposit rates to start with, that's great. And I think it's talked about, Mark and Jack talked about, that's just the beginning. And then you're going to start, building from there and trying to build those funding rates. The other ones that are interesting, I'll just share a couple other stats that we look at. We look a lot at number of transactions. So, we've got all sorts of different programs. We talked earlier about Greenlight as a parent-teen program. Well, that might have fewer transactions than maybe someone that's not a parent-teen program. Because as you can imagine, on a teen program, they spend a lot on a Saturday night, but they don't usually go to the grocery store on Tuesday. So, you see different variations there in types of programs. You look at, but if you think of debit programs, you might see on a everyday spend type of programs, you might see 15 to 20 transactions. We've got credit programs that are up to 25 to 30 transactions. The other one that's really interesting, not just number of transactions, but you look at the average transaction size. Again, on a consumer debit program, you can almost set your watch by about $40 is the average transaction size. Consumer credits may be about $60. But then as you look at kind of small business programs, we've got programs that are like, business challenger programs that are $70 or $80. Expense management programs might be $200. But we have some commercial use cases where their average transaction size is $600, $700, $800. So again, lots of variation that you look at as kind of the average transaction size on our portfolio. And similarly, then the last one that we look at that I think are very, very important to look at is what are your retention rates? So often, we focus on how many new cardholders or how many new customers did I get this month? But if you add 1,000 new customers this month, but you lost 900 from the month before, you're like, well, my net gain in my portfolio is really only 100. So you really have to look at this on what are your retention rates across your portfolio, right? It's one thing to get them. It's one thing to get them to start using a card, but then how long are they using this? Again, kind of some of the things we've talked about, the strategies then to help make that a top of wallet. So those are kind of the 4 or 5 different metrics that I really think are critical as you look at managing a successful card program.
Mark, I want to come to you and maybe zoom out a little bit. And I know, in our conversations over the past few years, I've always walked away impressed about how you're able to maneuver inside a traditional financial institution to not move fast and break things, but to disrupt things and make change. And that's not trivial. So what advice would you give to traditional banks looking to foster a culture of innovation and adapt to the needs and preferences of customers, which are changing relatively rapidly now?
Yeah, I would say go back to the first comment. Innovation without a mission is futile. It really is important to embrace define innovation for your organization. What does it mean to be innovative? And then what is the mission around that? That's kind of one of two parts. And then the second part is buy-in from the executives on that why. If you can't get both of those things right and they both need to be aligned, then it's never going to happen. And you are going to be forever a tortured poet, just to continue the Taylor Swift theme. So it's really important to get buy-in, but you got to think of it.
You also make buy-in too, right? I mean, I know that.
And that's the thing. That's why the why matters. Because if you just go ask, and that's what we did when we started 5 years ago. We asked each executive, what does it mean for you to be innovative? And we did in-depth interviews with each one of them and asked them about what does it mean. And then from that feedback, we created the mission and the why based on that feedback, and then reported back to them and said, this is what we think you want, right? I mean, this is what you said. And so that helped form our mission of, we want to help enable the entire bank to be innovative. And there's a culture of what we call innovativeness. But then we also want a small team to focus on business model disruption and innovation. And so how do we do both of those things? And then it was going, but starting there is super important. And the other thing I'll mention is one of the most common questions I get asked is, how do I get away with everything that we're doing? And the secret is, you don't get away with it. You have a good relationship with your head of InfoSec. You have a good relationship with your examiner in charge and regulator, and you talk about the things you're working on and where we will make customers whole if we break things, because we're piloting them. To Jack's point, you do things at small scale, but you fix anything that's broken with a customer because you never want to ruin that trust. That's different than scaling and platforming. And so you have to talk openly about that with your regulators, with your head of InfoSec. And there are non-negotiables that you want to do to maintain that trust. But it's okay to move fast and mess things up as long as you go and repair them and fix them. And so it's having that relationship with those key stakeholders internally and externally to be able to do that well.
Thank you. Jack, final question for you, because I want to end with Scott about AI and ML, because that's what we do. We have to end on that always.
Always.
So when you look out into the future, what are some of your top priorities for your team and for Daily Pay in general? Are there new features or innovations on the horizon that you're thinking that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, Zach, there are new features and innovations that we're going to be releasing actually this quarter, coming soon. But to stay true to what I shared earlier, how I think about innovation, how we're thinking about it, is the problems that we're excited about solving, right? Because we're going to solve these problems, and maybe the first version of a feature isn't going to solve it or address it properly, but we'll keep iterating it. So what problems am I excited about? Are we focused on? I'm excited about the problem of making your ends meet, right? We talked about 6 in 10 American households living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly as many have carried over a credit card balance, right? And so we know that we can find ways to help make their ends meet so that they never miss a bill, never incur late fees or penalties, don't start racking up more debt in that way, right? I'm excited about, and we're focused on the durable problem of helping people build a cushion, right? Helping them start, create, and sustain saving habits, helping overcome the misconception that you need lots of extra money in order to start a savings habit. But we also know that once people start habits and start a streak of saving, that we can help them continue on that journey from there. And I'm intrigued by the fact that, there's some really interesting durable problems with for the population that we serve. For example, they are sending money to support friends and family overseas at about 2.5 times the rate of the general population, right? And so that's an interesting innovation space for us to figure out, from a payments and a suite of financial offerings, including our card. How can that help remove friction and make that process better for them and get them and their families better outcomes? So those are just a few of the spaces I'm excited about. And I think as we, if we get together and talk again, even in the near future, we can share some of the examples of features we launched that maybe we thought helped address some of these durable challenges. Did they work? Didn't they? How are we pivoting? It would be a really fun, interesting journey.
It would be, and to hear sort of the iterative process that we talked about here, and how you're putting that to practice. Thank you for that, and good luck on your goals there. So back to you, Scott. We started the conversation with just sort of teasing a little bit about AI and ML. I know there's not a podcast that we've had at Tearsheet over the past, I'd call it 9 months, where it hasn't come up to some extent. sometimes more impactful than others. But how do you see these new technologies driving innovation in payments, and what potential do you see that they hold for the future?
Yeah, no, it is. It seems like it's every conversation. Taylor Swift, AI, and ML, not always in that order, but yes, it seems like
we got to all three. So
got to all three, right? We did all that. Check the box on all of those. I think we look at it in a couple different areas. I think we look at first and foremost, and something that we've invested in for the last number of years is looking at it from a cost savings perspective. And I'll kind of touch a little bit on maybe some revenue generating ideas that leverage machine learning and AI. But one in particular, just on cost savings, we have built an unbelievable product we call our payment risk platform. It leverages machine learning and AI for fraud prevention. And this can be everything from helping in better identifying from a KYC perspective upfront individuals into really looking at this from a transactional perspective. It's amazing to see what machine learning can do to help better track and see anomalies in spend patterns, behaviors, et cetera. And we've seen great results with this. And we've seen, portfolios that were maybe averaging 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 basis points of loss, dropping into like 2, 3, 4, 5 basis points of loss. So it's an amazing piece of cost savings, but not only on that front, but now you're not taking as many customer service calls. You're not taking as many disputes and chargebacks. So kind of getting back to this whole theme of, how to build card portfolios, use AI and machine learning to prevent those, fraudulent transactions from ever happening. And that's probably the key use case that we've seen over the last couple of years. And it just keeps getting better and better and better, as we look at that on cost savings. The other one I think that's interesting, kind of touching on the revenue side, one kind of key use case is using this for credit scoring and risk assessment. So on credit programs, name, address, date of birth, social, or companies, a specific tax ID number. I mean, those things have been, around for a long time, but using AI and machine learning to use different broader data sets, they're maybe not traditional. In addition to, again, you're still going to do that. I'm not saying necessarily you'd replace that fully, but using additional kind of machine learning and data element strategies there, I think it's the one thing that you can use to better do underwriting and credit scoring. So we see kind of both of those that we're seeing, kind of key use cases right now with machine learning and AI.
Appreciate that. I see that we're at the end of our time today. Wow. I mean, I feel like there was enough stuff here to talk about for hours on end. We packed a lot into an hour. I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Scott, Mark, and Jack for joining us. We do, as you see, there's a link there, tearsheet.co/card guide. That was the downloadable asset that we created last year that has a lot of some of the great insights that we had here. And is just a great place to start if you're thinking about launching a new card or you already have a card in market. So appreciate everyone for tuning in today. We'll also record this and publish this in our podcast channels as well. Zack Miller, Tearsheet Editor-in-Chief, signing off. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.